It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. I spoke with Eli Darris for the first time earlier today, and I think we agreed that his story is part of what he wants to present because it gives, I believe, a degree of authenticity and authority to the message, which I don't want to dilute by introducing it too much. So I'll just say that Eli is now a speaker and organizer for the ACLU in Minnesota. And he's going to tell us about mass incarceration and prison reform. Eli.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. How is this? How's the sounds on this? Is it good? Good in the back? Not too loud? I got this deep baritone voice. So good morning, everyone. It's my honor to come up here to Duluth. Pardon me, I have a parched voice. It's kind of dry, so I'm going to be sipping a lot of water throughout this presentation. I was actually most recently up here to Duluth several months ago. My friend and I and my significant other, we all came up here to ring in the new year. So we were just recently up here. We had a pretty good time. And so now I'm back. And I'm pretty honored. My name is Eli Darris. I'm with the ACLU. I'm our Smart Justice organizer. I also organize our field operations. That means that whenever we're doing something out in field, whether that's door knocking, whether that's phone banking, whether that is organizing an event or helping to assist another organization when they have an action going on, well, I'm one of the individuals that shows up and helps to provide leadership on the ground in terms of making sure everything goes smooth and that we have numbers and that people know what to do and where to go. So I'm one of those guys. Also, we most recently decided to step into the electoral process and help to increase voter turnout. And so part of my responsibilities were also targeting specific areas that had low turnout and figuring out how we can dramatically increase those turnouts. And so in some of our spaces, we were able to increase turnouts by somewhere between 15 and 25% in areas that had typically been overlooked by many campaigns because as someone who was a former field director of a mayoral campaign, you look at the map and it makes the most sense to send your limited resources into such a space and place in which you're going to have a maximum return. Well, we looked at the very same map and made the opposite decision. We looked to see where were the numbers the lowest. Okay, there they are, let's go. And that's where we went, and we saw dramatic increases. Today, I'm going to be giving a presentation on mass incarceration. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. I'm going to talk about the system, the process, and I'm also going to talk about you. I'm going to talk about what you can also do to plug into disrupting this system that is impacting all of us. Even if we're way up here in Duluth and it may not seemingly be impacting you, it impacts every last single one of us. It's therefore each of our duty to find ways to make this process and to make the system as healthy and as holistic as possible because the people who are inside of those facilities, 90% of them will be released. And the question is, how healthy of a person and how healthy of a community do we want people being released into? And so the community has work to do in and of itself, and also the people on the other side of the wall, they also have work to do. And so we all have work to do in order to ensure that we have a healthier society. This presentation is going to kind of get to some of that. And it's also really great and really dope because I have excellent PowerPoint transitions and, I had to utilize that. I'm a MOS certified specialist, and so I'm going to be utilizing that certification for everything that is worth. So it's going to be dancing, transitions, and exploding graphics and all of that. Yeah, that was an expensive certification. So, all right, so the title of this is Dangerous Minds. And this is going to be about my personal journey to disrupt, dismantle, and destroy the mass incarceration pipeline. I call that a 3D strategy. The 3D strategy basically looks fundamentally different at the same thing that we've all been looking at from different perspectives. How can we look at the same thing but differently than how we've been looking at it for the past several decades? But before I go into the 3D strategy and how does that look, where does that land on you, how can you get involved, how can you engage, I need to first tell you who am I and why am I. Tell you a little bit about my life, my journey, my struggles. Now I'm sipping water. So I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. That's where I was raised. I was born in California, but I consider myself from St. Louis, Missouri. For my infancy, that's where I was. And you know, I really enjoyed growing up surrounded by the people who nurtured me. They really poured a lot of themselves inside of me. And while sometimes I found myself in very difficult situations and I saw things that no child should ever really have to see growing up, it cannot be denied that in that same space and in them same places, I also was able to understand deeply what does community love mean? You know, what does it mean to you know, have a neighbor look out and see you doing something wrong and chasing you? You know, it was truly community growing up. It was a small community within a large city. But I had a lot of struggles growing up. I struggled at home. I struggled with the relationship between my parent and I. And I ultimately made a decision that, yeah, you know what, I think I'm just going to go ahead and just leave. And so a carnival came to town. That's right. A carnival came to town. And I had participated in the carnival over the past several years. I had a really good time. This particular time, they asked me, would you like to jump inside of one of the booths and make some extra money? Now, you know, I'm about 14 years old, you know, junior high school, feeling myself, recognized I had a really great opportunity to see some beautiful young ladies, and they would see me on the other side of the booth, and I basically had license to just call out to them. And so I said yes. Yes, I didn't ask how much I was getting paid. That was a tertiary thought. The most important thing was that I was going to be seen. And so I said yes. And so in the carnival, it was interesting, to say the least. That's the Minnesota nice interesting, to say the least. They asked me one day, close to the end, if I would like to leave St. Louis and go with them. And I was like, nah, I'm not leaving the city and going. It's insane. And then there was a situation where I got in trouble in school and I got expelled. And so rather than go home and potentially have to deal with those consequences, I thought that an easier solution would just be to skip town with the carnival. And so I skipped town with the carnival. And we actually traveled around the better part of the United States. I went as far south as Albuquerque, New Mexico, and as far north as Roseau, Minnesota, Jamestown, North Dakota, and a lot of the cities in between, Amarillo, Texas, Denver, Colorado, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But that life was really draining. It sucks a certain part out of your soul. It's very difficult every single week to find yourself in a new city, seeing different faces, different places. Every single week, you are literally accosted by hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands and thousands of people every single week. And so eventually it drained me down to the point where I had to crawl back home. And I went back home. Then there was a situation where I decided to leave with the carnival again the very next year. So I left yet again. This particular time didn't turn out as well as the other times. In fact, I found myself involved in a lot of heavy tensions within the carnival. A lot of things that happen behind the scenes. People go to the carnivals, they see the lights, the sounds, the actions, and all of the beautiful, great things. But when the lights go down, and the civilians are no longer on the campus, that's when the culture of the carnival kind of comes to life, really. And that's the culture in which I found myself. For this particular one, it was a very violent one. In fact, I was involved in multiple fights. There came a point in which there was a larger fight. And in this larger fight, a gentleman actually lost his life, and I played a part in the taking of this man's life. And I ultimately, once again, was all drained out. Like, this life was just really like squeezing the spirit out of me. And so I ran back home yet again. Naturally, an investigation ensued. Naturally, the detectives hunted me down to St. Louis, and I was brought back up here to Minnesota to face charges. They wanted me to testify against the adults who were involved in the case. At the time, I was 15 years old, and I had made a determination that, yeah, I'm just not going to do that. In fact, I thought that all of the other adults who were involved would basically do the same thing that I did, and was like, whatever you're going to charge me with, that's what you're going to charge me with, but I'm not going to take a deal, to testify against someone else so that I can get out earlier. I just refused to do it, and I paid the price. And so I was charged with the most capital level crime, because in almost every instance, when you're charged with a really high level offense, and it typically is going to be much higher than the actual offense calls for, you're typically going to plead out to something lesser, sometimes dramatically lesser, so that the most capital charge that you could have on that particular case might carry 30 years, and you might end up plea bargaining to 1 year probation, right? I mean, when you look at the difference here, like, here I can get 10 years in prison, here I can get 6 months in the workhouse. Almost nobody really gets that 10 years. Almost everyone pleads out, but the threat, it's a really high level threat of having to do very significant years when you can just plea. Even if you're guilty, you can just plead and do significantly less. And I was faced with that. I was faced with either life in prison or take a deal, testify, and I would have basically gotten out in 8 years. So I refused to do it. I was found guilty, and I was sentenced to life in prison as a teenager. Fortunately for me, let's take a step back from that. I'll talk about the fortunate part in a moment. So there I found myself as a young person, 15 years old, inside of a prison with grown men, many of whom have been there for many years, some for sex offenses, against 14 and 15-year-olds, and they put the 14 and 15-year-olds in the same unit as these individuals. Why would they do that? Because both are kind of considered vulnerable populations. And because both are considered vulnerable populations, to the powers that be, it makes the most sense that you'll be able to keep a closer eye on them if you put them together. So you'll be able to monitor better who's coming into the unit and potentially taking advantage of them if you can just keep everybody together. Now, naturally, to a natural mind, that makes no sense. But there are many things within the correctional system that literally makes no sense. There are 14-year-olds in there serving life in prison. The particular 14-year-old that I'm thinking of, his name is Jerry Vane. He was involved in a drive-by shooting. He was in the back seat, and he didn't take actions to prevent the adults who actually pulled the trigger from not doing that. And in Minnesota, if you're an accessory to the crime, then that carries the same weight as the actual actor of the crime, because you have a duty to disrupt if you're able to, or you also have a duty to flee. And so in doing none of those, then you are an accessory to it, and you are therefore as guilty as the actual perpetrator, and you therefore get the same exact sentence, even if you're 14 years old. And so Jerry Vane, he's still in prison right now. You guys can look his case up if you want to, but he's still in prison right now. So you have 14-year-olds inside of the same situation in which they are showering daily, even fighting with the adults. And I remember finding myself stunned, sentenced to spend the rest of my life in prison, walking through the prisons almost like a zombie. And I recall standing under the basketball hoop in the gym as all of the activity was going on around me, thinking to myself, this is where I'm going to spend the rest of my natural life. According to the judge said, I sentence you to spend the rest of your natural life in the care of the Commissioner of Corrections. Gavel. And as I was standing there, thinking about the woe that is me, I recall seeing like two pair of legs dangling around my face. And I couldn't quite understand how are there, I'm on the ground, how are there legs like around my face area? And then I realized what was happening. And that's the introduction of me and Sammy. Sammy Lamont Johnson, that's his name. Love that guy. Knew him for many, many, many years. Ate together, kicked it together, celebrated birthdays, Christmases, everything. But Sammy's introduction to me was him screaming out to the rest of the gym, I'm sitting on his head, y'all. He dunked on me. I was under the hoop. And he came and dunked on me. That was my introduction to Sammy. And so I'm fighting to get this guy's legs from around my face. And he's screaming out, I'm sitting on him, y'all. Hey, Sammy, I guess. I mean, that's our introduction. But he turned out to be one of my greatest friends in there. Someone who I ate with daily, celebrated life with daily, celebrated, our accomplishments together, whether it was, getting a GED, whether it was Christmas, whatever it was, we did it together daily. There was actually a small motley crew of us that enjoyed life together daily as a band of brothers inside a very difficult environment, walking the same halls for many, many, many years. But Sammy was also a juvenile, certified and sentenced to life just like me. Sammy was 17 years old when he was arrested and ultimately convicted and given a life prison sentence. In fact, when I was given a presentation at Hamline University, one of the instructors came up to me afterwards, and she is one of the directors in the Innocence Project. And she said to me, Sammy's case is a case that I actually teach to every last single crop of my law students. She said, Sammy was likely innocent, and even if he wasn't innocent, his case was one of the most easily defensible cases she said she had ever seen. And if anybody know anything about the Innocence Project, they don't take no cases. They probably take one case a year, maybe. It's like if they take your case, then they would have really done due diligence to make a determination to review and assess the case. Well, Sammy didn't get that opportunity to have the Innocence Project review his case. The Innocence Project is now speaking about his case. The Innocence Project is now presenting to crops of law students on his case. But for Sammy, it doesn't matter So one day, I woke up and switch out was delayed. And typically when a switch out is delayed that early in the morning and it's like an emergency count that just, recently had something significant happen in one of the cells, probably a suicide, something significant. And so a gentleman came up to me and said, man, somebody told me Sammy committed suicide. Now, first of all, like the people who I was with, yeah, we had life, things was difficult, but like we was rocking strong. I mean, we was role playing together daily, sometimes D&D, even though I really couldn't stand the system because it was like really stilted and like it didn't allow for creativity. So I'm more of a Palladium type of guy in our D20 system. But Sammy was also one of the for the Dungeons and Dragons people, they would call it a DM. But for people like me, I play Palladium, so it's called a GM, that's a game master. And so Sammy was one of the most prolific game masters I had ever met in my life. The man would draw the maps, right? And he'll draw maps, just in case you go down certain corridors. And then he'll have consequences and blessings based off of the decisions that you make. And then he'll also have 10 players at the table. And the previous night, he would have thought of scenarios for whatever you of the 10 people would do. And he would create maps. Like, this was an ingenious soul right here. Brilliant soul right here. He was an artist. He was a gifted athlete, obviously, dunking on me. He was a beautiful soul. And so, obviously, I can just wipe that away, right? Because that's not Sammy. You typically get misinformation inside a prison. And so you got to be really quick to dismiss the initial reports because they're typically going to be off base. And so I felt really comfortable dismissing the initial reports, because me and my crew, we just didn't rock like that. We would talk to each other. We would have conversations. We would talk each other off the ledge. We were a band of brothers in there. And so then someone else came down the steps a little bit later, someone who I trusted. And they basically said the same thing to me. So I shot up the steps. It's a rule violation. You're not supposed to go to multiple tiers, blah, blah, blah. And so I ran down the galley. I heard some COs saying something to me about, tiers, something, violation, something. And it's like, whatever. I run to a cell. And whenever a significant incident occurs, they put this yellow board. They put a yellow board over the cell so as to not allow other individuals to be able to reach in and take anything out if it's of evidentiary value or anything like that. And so as to preserve a scene if it's a significant assault that occurred. They're going to want to come in and take pictures and things of that nature. And so we call it the yellow board of death because whenever a suicide occurs or a homicide occurs, then they put the board up. And, crime scene investigators and all of that stuff, they all come later. And so I get to Sammy's cell, and the board was there. So it was true. So my friend, Sammy, had committed suicide at the age of 25. He made a decision that he was not going to live life inside of those prison walls anymore, that he would not spend one more birthday inside of there. And yeah, he didn't. And so now the Innocence Project is presenting on his case, and Now, he's, one of the most innocent cases ever seen and, all of this other stuff. But for Sammy, it really doesn't matter. Now I can understand, because I was there, I understand the starkness that can envelop someone's spirit inside of a space and a place like that. Because I was also convicted and sentenced to life in prison, told I was going to die in there. And I knew that what I was convicted of, I didn't do. I wasn't innocent, but I didn't do that. So, I understand. I get it, right? I understand how in an environment like this, a young person, because I don't care if you certify me, I don't care if you wave a wand over me and say you're now a grown-up, we were still children. We may have been incarcerated with grown-ups, but what they didn't do was give us an opportunity to go off to the side and do some push-ups and get bigger and stronger and pop some spinach in like Popeye. That's what they didn't do. When they certify you as an adult, they immediately put you in with the big boys. There's no differentiation there. That's where you are. And so I get it. I understand how Sammy could have reached a point inside of that system, in which is day in and day out, steady attacks against your humanity, day in and day out. You're dressing the same as everybody else, day in and day out. When to eat, what to eat, where to eat, day in and day out. Want to call you offender instead of your name, which I won't reply to, day in and day out. Instead of calling my name, they call a cell number, which I'm not coming. 322, come down to the desk. First of all, I don't even know who 322 is, so I'm just going to keep watching my TV until I hear my name or something like that. And they'll spend another 10, 15 minutes. 322, don't you hear? Come down to the desk. I'm just not going anywhere. This is a small attempt to maintain my own personal dignity. I'm not 322. That's a cell number. And if I die, somebody's going to be put inside of this cell moments later. And now that person is 322. The 322 is not my identity. Call me by my name. Can I have that modicum of dignity? So day in and day out, you're fighting against these, as Shakespeare would call it, slings and arrows. Day in and day out. And I get it. It piles up, and you got to find mental release. You cannot allow it to envelop your entire spirit and envelop your entire soul. You can't, because if you do, then it's going to be blackness. It's going to cloak you. I don't know if any of y'all watched that Spider-Man movie and seen that little black ooze stuff get on top of the regular Spider-Man, but it will envelop your entire personhood and it will destroy you. Day in and day out, it will destroy you. And it destroyed my friend Sammy. He's so controlling, by the way, y'all, that he designed his obituary, right? He said exactly what kind of pictures and where he wanted everything to be. He wrote the poems, right? This is how controlling he was. He was just a massively genius-minded, we really lost a great spirit here on this earth who would have been able to contribute greatly to us. And he was probably free, but I guess that don't matter, does it? Not now, not for him. It's hard as a juvenile in those kind of situations to understand this criminal justice system in which the stakes are super high, but you might not just get it like a grown-up would, right? And so I would wager now that if it was that Sammy that was facing those same charges, the outcome would be different. If it was me facing the charges that I faced at 15, the outcome would be different, guaranteed. But it's hard, to, be a teenager, going to movies and whatnot. And now, you're facing significant consequences. And you have to now make adult decisions and think very sharply, or the consequences are going to be dire. And for some people, significantly dire. These are the types of stories. This is the type of experience that I have had that helps to inform my processes and help to inform my work with regard to how do I revitalize, reorganize, and disrupt the system that is funneling in many of our best and brightest youth when they really don't have to be, because we've had an explosive growth in our prison population, while at the same time we're having a decline in crime. So the question is like, why? And of course, there's a lot of political type of reasons why, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So what do we do? So I came up with a strategy that I call the 3D strategy. It's about disrupting, dismantling, and destroying this mass incarceration epidemic that's swallowing up all of us, including your bank accounts. We're all paying for it. What lessons have I learned? What helps to inform me in terms of how do we move forward looking at this massive, big old, huge conglomerate of a system, right? Whereas when you're looking at a problem of that magnitude, of that size, it's like, well, what do I do? Like, I'm just one little old person. How can I do anything with such a massive system? It's $1 billion industry. In Minnesota alone, there's over 10,000 inmates just in state prisons. Then you got the county inmates, and then you got all of the people on probation or parole. So that's a massive system. And so what I had to do was just begin looking at things differently. And a great wise sage helped to inform my lens in terms of like, how do we go about this work? And his name is Yoda. And he says that you must unlearn what you have learned, right? How do we go about doing this work? Well, some stuff in your minds that you think you know right now, right? About me, about the system, about life. We think we know. And because we think we know, we arrive at our conclusions, and they come packed in, and then that is going to be the determining factor in like the decisions that we make, because we already know. And it's that already knowing that is perpetuating the very systems and the very inequalities and everything else that we see now. And so we had this really dope, bright Jedi crash and burn on a planet. And he was brilliant, and he knew. And he sees this green thing bothering him, in his Jedi-ness, in his greatness, to have this thing just like bothering, not knowing that the very thing that, he was being dismissive with is a master. Like, he literally has the answers. But because of the lens that this great Jedi had, I mean, he was nice with the little, he was good with it. Smart, he was smart. Everybody had been telling him since he was a boy how brilliant he was. He grew up immersed in the culture telling him how right he was. And then now you have this. I mean, but I look at him differently. I see him and I see a master, a brilliant master. And I'm fortunate that that's how I see him. So if I would have crashed on that planet right now, then, you know, I would have got all of the teachings I could from this master. So we have a master attempting to help this young, brilliant mind see something differently that he thinks he already knows. And what did he say? In order to become a master, if you really want to get something done, then the first thing you need to do is unlearn what you think you already know. Step one. That's like the base. So if we can't even get there, then we can't go anywhere. Step one. You must unlearn what you have learned. So it became important to me to begin better controlling the narrative. You see, I had been through this system. I had spent 17 and a half years in prison. From 15 to 32, I was incarcerated. I was in the super maximum all the way down to the minimum. I know the system. Now, don't ask me how can you get more maximum than maximum, right? But again, y'all are trying to use logical minds. Remember, this is the system, and it don't work like that. So it can become super maximum, right? And so I was in a super maximum prison. And next they probably would have put duper after super duper maximum prison. I don't know. And so I was in one of the few super maximum prisons because I was maladjusted. I guess I was just, you know, the weird type of human who just didn't want to be like incarcerated for life and be a teenager at the same time. So I was adjusting very poorly to such an extent that they decided to send me to one of the super maximum prisons. You know, where they got like Unabombers and the leader of the folks, and you know, Larry Hoover is his name. Like, you know, where they got like the top dogs. You know, they decided that I needed to go to a super maximum prison. So I've been all throughout the system. Like, I've been from the top to the bottom. I've even helped to develop programming. I've gotten a GED while in there. I've gotten a college degree while in there. I became the first person ever to be A+ certified. So I'm a technician right now. My certification expires in October, so I'm gonna have to recertify, and the A+ certification exam. Is any A+ certified people in there? Come on, where are my brothers and sisters at? No one? Okay, so I'm a tech nerd. For those of you who don't know what A+ is, it means that you can fix systems. It means that, you know, I can also help with networking, network cabling, all of that stuff. So I'm certified to do all of that stuff. And I was the first one in the Department of Corrections history to be able to become out as an A+ certified technician, right? And so, well, thank you. And so like, I dominated up in that system. I know that system. And so now I'm out here with the opportunity to help to create the narrative in terms of like, how do we disrupt that? So now I'm the expert. I'm not lettered and degree. There's no JD behind my name, none of that stuff, right? But I'm the expert. We call it subject matter expertise. So the first thing that I realized I had to do was just begin controlling the narrative and begin helping to frame this up differently than how people had been seeing it. And this is also coming from an informed experience, coupled with theoretical knowledge as well. And so I came up with the 3D strategy. The 3D strategy is a whole view strategy. You look at the entirety of the, where am I at on time? You look at, I don't want to bore y'all. I don't want to put y'all to sleep by blabbering on too long. You look at the entirety of the model, right? And not just like in a two-dimensional, like this two-dimensional here. You look at the entirety of it all, right? So that you can see things that you otherwise would have missed with your traditional way of viewing. Here's an example. So I got a chance to go see Black Panther. And my girlfriend and I decided that, you know, we were going to go and view it in IMAX 3D blast, right? Whatever that was, the chairs vibrate and, you know, sounds is coming at you. And I remember watching it and like you could see like a little blade of grass coming at you. And it's like, wow, like with the 3D goggles on, this is a wonderful like experience, right? I'd never experienced it before. And so then I had a chance to go and view it in the regular way, the regular screen. And it was like, man, nice movie. But it wasn't 3D IMAX super blast at you, right? And so it's just a difference. Like when you put the goggles on and you see things, the very same thing that everybody else has already been seeing from the same lens and the same narrative, when you look at the same thing with different goggles on, then you're going to see things that other people aren't because your goggles are informing your view, if that makes sense. And so I want to inform the goggles that I want us to put on because I want to put some information and some substance behind it, because then that's going to help us who may not have had the same experience get the experience vicariously through me to better help you make determinations in terms of how to disrupt. Strategy 1, sentencing reform, obviously. So I look at the mass incarceration thing that we're all talking about, like this big crazy monster, right? That's like sitting on like 8 legs, right? And these 8 legs are huge pillars that is just like munching through and just like eating people up. It's gobbling everybody up, right? And like, so if we look at this huge monstrosity that's just like Godzilla in us, then, you know, you're gonna do what everybody else did. And what do they do? What did they do? They did what?
Ran away.
Yeah, they ran away. Are y'all asleep out here? Y'all see Godzilla coming at you, what you gonna do?
Run away.
Yeah, just like all the people in the movies, they were, oh, and then they ran. It makes sense. It's a monstrosity coming at you. Self-preservation is in order here. You're gonna run away. And so what I'm trying to do is take this thing from that high level, break this thing down a little bit. And so if we see this thing that big, like they see all the numbers, millions of people, America leads the nation, they got 5% of the population, and they got 25% of the, like, if you're looking at these huge numbers, the question is, with all of that, literally, what can I do? And so I break it down. I say, oh, let's look at this thing differently. Yeah, this thing has like multiple legs. But if you attack a leg, and you attack a leg, and you attack a leg, and I attack a leg, and I don't gotta be all focused on the other legs, because I got my leg, right? Here's the thing about the DLC. So like, let's say they was coming to extract you out of a cell. They're not just gonna come and like all line up outside the door and figure it out as it's going on. You're gonna be in there being disruptive. They're going to call the CERT team, or they're going to call the A team. The A team is going to say, okay, we're going to extract that person. They're then going to go to a room, and they're going to look at your profile, and they're going to talk about you, and they're going to talk about how has his previous extractions been, all while you're doing whatever you're doing in the cell, because you're not going nowhere anyway. And so like you're rigor and you're doing whatever you're doing in there, and they're planning and plotting and scheming on you in a whole different other part of the prison. Then they go and they put on all of their gear, but they had made decisions before they left out of the room. They said, you're responsible for head, you're responsible for leg, left leg, you're responsible for right leg, right? So they all have a duty, they all have a role. And so then they put the equipment on, and then they march to the cell. And also to increase the intimidation factor for you that they're coming to get, but for the other people who are also witnessing, they make sure that they make noise, and they make sure that it's very clear what's about to happen, and this can happen to you too if you make the determination that you want to go down the same road. So they're coming, and they already know what leg, what arm, what leg, what everything they're going to get, because they planned it. right? And so once they do the extraction, so somebody is also in charge of door. Her whole duty is to open the door. His whole duty is to open the door and get out of the way. That's their duty. That's it, right? Leg, arm, door. Somebody has cuffs, right? And so now they're there. They're lined up. Door opens, boom, they go in. They get to their area of responsibility only, singularly. That's the most important thing. And they're like, you're done. 30 seconds. Because they planned, they organized, they only focused on what they needed to focus on, and they got the job done. And it was over with. Hopefully you weren't hurt. But if you were, then, the media wouldn't report on it. But you were extracted. And so, what I'm saying is, let's not look at the whole mass incarceration thing as this big old huge Godzilla-like thing. Godzilla had like these little bitty arms too, didn't he? Legs, eyes. And so what I would like for us to refocus our mind on, just unlearn about some things and learn this. Yes, it's big, it's a huge conglomerate, but like you can focus in on a key area of it and do your work in that key area of it, and others are doing their work in that key area of it, and then we can begin to make progress. But it will require intentionality. It will require discipline, and it will require a willingness to just stay in your lane. Everybody say, stay in your lane. Everybody say, stay in your lane. The worst thing in the world when I'm driving and you're gonna get like 5 hunks out of me is if you're starting to get in my lane. You got a whole lane over there, and it's like all this white in between us. Why are you getting in my lane? Because you get in my lane, you're gonna mess up my whole little deal here. And so get in your lane. And it helps with the orderly flow of everything. Now we can get something done. So strategy 1. And then look at these strategies and figure out where you can get in. Eradicate sentencing disparities, obviously. Minnesota leads in sentencing disparities. Leads the nation. One of the worst. Yes, really. You can Google it. Right? We're actually like down there with like Mississippi, and like we're like bad in terms of the disparities. In fact, I'm on some of the JDAI committees. That's the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiatives. I'm on the Executive Steering Committee for the County of Hennepin, and I also am the chairman over the Partners with Families and Communities, in which we are attempting to bring community together with the system so that we can work together, because we're subject matter experts. We don't just have to rely on people who are within the system to be experts. We are experts as well, and so we're partnering together, and I'm the chair of that committee. We're partnering together to figure out strategies to disrupt the mass incarceration of our youth. And so the Caucasian youth, in terms of their displacement, in terms of the determinations to remove them from the home and incarcerate them, the replacements, the bar, the cameraman was telling me something, threw me for 1 second, but the bar is about right here for them in terms of they're being taken out of the home, and then it's like this for African American youth. Now, the first time I saw that, I literally cried. Like, it pissed me off to know it. Like, it's so stark. It's so stark. It's just stark. And, and I had to do something about it. I had to, stay in there, but it's so glaring. It's like, how are y'all working in this, seeing this glaring disparity? It's just like glaring. Or the African American youth just fundamentally worse? It's just like bad people, fundamentally? Like, or is this something obviously systemic, but is this something more systemic at play? When you see a level of disparity of that gross nature, that's obviously a systemic failure. It's systematized in some particular way. Yeah. We need to eradicate mandatory minimums. Judges hate them. Judges want to be able to, have a little bit of flexibility, and not just sentence based strictly off of a mandatory minimum and nothing else. We need to eradicate mandatory minimums. It was mandatory that I was sentenced to life in prison. The judge did not want to sentence me to life in prison. Well, first of all, the judge knew that no evidence had been presented that I committed an aggravated robbery that led to a homicide. Like, there was literally no evidence presented. And if it wasn't for the state Supreme Court, I would still be in prison right now. The state Supreme Court was basically like, yeah, we would love to sustain this conviction because that's all we love to do. But God dang it, y'all didn't present no evidence. So it's like, we can't sustain it even though we really want to. We can't. Prosecutor, you presented no evidence. The jury just found me guilty with no evidence. None. They didn't present a shred of evidence. If they would have presented a shred of evidence, the high court does not reverse because they have to defer to the jury. This is why we have a jury. We have a jury so that the juries can be the determiners of facts. And courts should be coming behind a jury who looked at evidence and made their fair decision. And so when they do that, they take it very serious. And even if it's a shred of evidence, they're upholding your conviction. They were like, God dang it, prosecutor, didn't present no evidence. We got to let them loose. Or I could have been Sammy. So judges want freedom too, and like the judges' hands are handcuffed. They're just like functionaries in this clog. They're clogs in the wheel, really. I mean, we can just eliminate them at the sentencing part, basically, because sometimes they upward and go downward, but like they run the risk of potentially having that overturned because we have sentencing guidelines to tell the judge this is what you sentenced to for this particular thing. Stay within this grid right here, or run the risk of us reversing, which is embarrassing to you, and sending it right back and sentence them right, we'll tell you. They don't like that. We need to get rid of that. These are actually what are creating huge disparities. Typically, if you have the finances and the resources, you can just plea bargain out of a lot of this, and you won't have to face a mandatory minimum anyway. I think we can stop sentencing juveniles to life in prison. That's pretty low-hanging fruit there. So on the planet Earth, it's the United States at this point that sentences juveniles to life. It was us and Somalia. And then Somalia was like, it's too barbaric. We can't do that anymore. And so not even Somalia at this point. Now it's just us, U.S., us. That's it. We're the only nation on earth, 10 minutes. We're the only nation on earth at this point that sentences juveniles to life in prison. I think we can work to reform that. Reform the civil commitment process for individuals who were convicted. Now, this is an unpopular opinion, but like this is a civil liberties thing as well. For individuals who were convicted of sex crimes, at the end of that conviction in which they served their time, if the prosecutor makes a determination that, the community's still not safe with you, then they can create what's called a civil commitment process. And despite the fact that you hadn't committed a new crime, you can go through the civil commitment process and you can basically be reincarcerated basically for life. So there's been individuals who haven't committed a new crime, but they have been deemed as being dangerous enough to potentially commit a new crime, that they have been civilly incarcerated, some for 30 years. It's unpopular because it's like, yeah, lock up that rapist person. I get it. Like, these are like the lowest of the low. It's easy to say, like, get those pariahs out of our sight. But there's a danger to that. Even the federal government has deemed our system unconstitutional, and the feds have instructed us, y'all got to have more of a process that has like safeguards in place, constitutional and all that, right? And so they said, fix your system. And Minnesota, our governor at the time said, we ain't fixing nothing, right? So we're basically like thumbing our nose at the federal government who's saying fix the system because like it's unconstitutional. It's a threat to all of us because we can't allow our government, based off of a new crime not being committed, to say you might commit a crime, and because you might commit a crime or you might do this, it's thought crimes. I don't know if any of y'all watched that movie. It's a potential thought crime because you're guilty of this thought crime, then you're going to have to go and like we'll put you down for another 30 years with no crime committed. These people have maybe served 12, 15 years, and it was time for them to get released. They would have then stepped, basically out. Sheriffs would have came and got them, put them in the county jail, put them through a civil commitment. They're civilians like you and me, but they're put back inside a prison, basically. But they are civilians. That's why it's a civilian process. I would say we need to reform that. Smartly revise state laws that prohibit returning citizens from working in various places. I can't go shovel horse maneuver at a racetrack because I have a felony, so I'm banned from like working at the racetrack, which is dumb. But there's a whole bunch of other places where I can't work, and it makes no sense. It has nothing to do with the crime. It's like totally unrelated, but it boxes you in and boxes you out, and it's dumb. And it's making re-entry more difficult. I'm gonna have to burn through some of this, y'all. I apologize. Increase educational access. I had to fight like heck, just to get educated. Typically, I wasn't allowed to get into many programs. They'll say, you have too much time. You have too little time. What happened there? You have too much time. You have too little time. It's just like, I was never able to get in because either I had too much time or too little time. So for someone convicted of homicide, for instance, I wasn't able to get into anger management, and that made me angry. But seriously, I had too much time to get into anger management, and then I had too little time, and it's like, what the heck? Because they have a list, and you're either going to be, you're going to continue to drop down. So the people with the fewest amount of time are the ones who get to go first, and so I had way too much time, and so I could never get in. Add more therapists of color and infuse culturally specific and relevant therapy practices into inpatient treatment. They don't got no black people as therapists. They probably got one or two, and that's whack. Stillwater has a prison population of I don't know what the population size is, but 49% of it is African American. Yeah, the whole prison, half of it is black, right? And we're about 4%, maybe 5% of the state population. Continue to work to increase quality healthcare services and psychological services. It's so hard to get inside of psych services in there. It's so difficult. I just whatever. It's really difficult. If we really want to work to make that system better, then obviously that's something, once we sentence someone to go and spend time in prison to get better, then we need to have things in prison in place for people to get better. If not, they will be getting out. 90% of individuals who are incarcerated return and come back home. The question is, who do we want to come back home? Re-entry activities should happen earlier. They didn't even allow me to start my re-entry services until so they confirmed my date 2 weeks before I got out in terms of my living space, and I wasn't allowed to come to transition services until 60 days out. 2 months, 17 years, and I had to wait till the last 2 months to start re-entry services. And I was a teenager, so I never lived life as an adult out here. Better engage community organizations and partners in returning citizens. These organizations is getting all this money and putting fake information out there about what they're doing to help people return and re-enter, and they ain't doing jack. And so they need to be holding them accountable. These are our tax dollars that we're giving to our government that's turning around and giving it to the Department of Corrections, that's turning around and giving it to these community organizations, and they ain't making us safer because they ain't doing what they're saying that they're doing. They don't even answer the phone, y'all. Y'all know how many times I called some of these organizations and they wouldn't even answer the phone. I had to get someone to three-way me and sneak calls in, and that's a rule violation. I had to violate the rules to make the organization answer the phone. And they were like, why didn't you just call normal? Because you guys didn't answer the phone. Well, we don't normally accept collect calls. Well, it wasn't a collect call. If you would have listened to the message, it tells you I prepaid for it. Well, what do you want? Literally. Hold community organizations accountable. I'm gonna put that in there twice because I really mean it. And so I'm going to wrap some of this up. I want to ask you, in terms of a 3D lens, what lens do you utilize as you do your work, right? Because you can enter into something and put a lens on yourself and say, I'm going to be a disruptor. Let's say someone wants to become a correctional officer. Like, they can put a lens on, a decarcerate lens, a disrupt mass incarceration lens, and enter in on the front end of their career or inside of the back end of their career and put a whole new lens on it. Imagine if a captain was to say, you know what, I'm going to put a decarceration lens on. I'm going to view all of the things that I'm doing now from that lens right there. I mean, imagine someone with that much power, what they can do inside of the prisons. Imagine a new CEO going in with brand new lenses on, in which this person is humanizing and they're matriculating and moving up in like organ. Imagine if we just utilize a different set of lenses doing the same exact work, how fundamentally different things could be. You all right now can put a lens on right now and do the same work but differently and more effectively right now. Same work, different mindset. Same job, different mindset. Same organization that you all are part of right now, different mindset. And you're going to get different results. You must unlearn. What can you do? I ain't going to be able to go through all of this. I'm going to just click about 5 minutes. I'll take 5. I'm just going to click. You can volunteer as educators. You can be intentional about like whatever your vocational choice is. You can demand legislative change. You can demand increased civilian oversight. Civilians don't have no oversight over the police departments at all, nowhere in the state. They passed a state law back in 2015 that made it so that you have no more power as a civilian over the police departments. Literally, they passed a law to strip you of all authority and all power. Now, if you think about our federal government, and if you think about our military services, what do they have to have at the top of them? Who? Over all of them. And it's basic. It's actually interwoven into the fabric of our nation. We want a civilian over that because we don't want, some despot, some great general to take over the army and say, yeah, this is what we're going to do now. We don't want that. So we put a civilian over those. You have no say anymore. They passed a state law in 2015. You have no authority over our police departments, and they got the power to take your life. You don't have no oversight over that. Hold community organizations accountable. Is that my 3rd time? Yeah. I must really mean that. Invest in the next generation. Disrupt school to prison pipeline through the power of education. I'm a big proponent of education. If any of you all are educators right now, you can literally call up to the prison and say, I want to come in and teach a class. They're going to make you go through some training and all of that stuff. And it's not, a lot, but they're going to make you go through some training. And then you can literally go inside the prison and teach a course, disruption. That's being a disruptor. Them professors that came in there, they were disruptors, teaching me, educating me, girding me up. I didn't go to high school. That was my high school. Education is the journey. Well, education is the best provision for life's journey. Be the change. There's no cavalry coming. You are the cavalry. Ain't no help coming. You are the help. Don't look around. Nobody else is coming. If you ain't coming, ain't nobody coming. You got to be the cavalry. And thank you.